Dear learners, now after looking at forecast sheet function in the Microsoft Excel, we will jump to another concept which is forecasting for future with Seasonality Index. In this particular session, we will understand what is Seasonality Index and how to calculate it, also how to forecast the future period considering the seasonal index concept. In all our sessions, we have always seen that demands are not stable. Demands are consistently changing due to multiple drivers. Sometimes you see ups and downs in the demand, and sometimes demand shows seasonality in their past pattern or their past behavior. So based on that, the seasonality index is one of the method that helps to create the better forecast in the future. Now let's jump into the Microsoft Excel to calculate forecasts considering seasonality index method. Before we move ahead, we will see when we should use this particular forecasting method. So here, we should use this forecasting method when demand is not stable across multiple periods or across the years and it follows some seasonal pattern in some periods. Okay, so there are multiple scenarios which actually influence the demand patterns, and based on that particular scenario, we have to also understand whether the seasonal patterns are available in past demand or not. So the first thing is, when the demands are not stable, we should actually look forward to use seasonal index method. Secondly, when demand shows a repeating seasonal pattern year after year, or maybe month after month, or maybe quarter after quarter, we should look forward for seasonality index method. Third, when sales peak and dip in specific months or quarters. So whenever there is ups and downs about the demand pattern in specific period, we should ideally look forward for the seasonal index calculations. The fourth is when historical data is clearly reflecting the seasonality. And finally, whenever average demand alone does not explain the demand variation. So sometimes it is not very easy to understand the future forecasting based on the average demand of past period. And that's why we have to also consider that average of demand alone does not explain the demand variation. The next is, we have also seen that when the top-down forecasting approach is used, we are basically getting the number that talks about how much demand will reflect in the future period. For an example, if the leadership tells us that if the future demand will increase or decrease by certain percentage, like 10% or 20% based on market scenarios, then seasonal index is very helpful to understand future forecasts. Finally, we will see one example here above in spreadsheet. And in this example, what assumption we have taken is that the demand will increase by 10% compared to the previous demand. And what is expected here? We have to calculate the forecast for 2022. So as we know, demand will increase by 10% compared to the previous year's demand. So here you can see the data. So data talks about last 4 years demand data, which is 2018, 2019, 2020 and 2021. Further, we have demand based on all the months starting from January to December. So here for 2018, the demand for January was 284 quantity, and you can see the all demand numbers in this particular table. Lastly, we also totaled the demand numbers for the entire year below. So you can see in the year 2018, the total demand for the product was around 4,556 units. In 2019, it was around 3,702. In 2020, again 4,558 units. And in 2021, it was around 4,982 quantity. Now we are told that this demand is going to increase by 10% in 2022. So if we do that logic and understand the increase by formula, you will actually see the demand that will increase to 5,480 units in 2022. Okay, so let's assume that a future demand will be 5,480 rupees for the next year 2020, and this is coming out from the particular top-down approach, or when we consider the market situation that our product's demand will increase in the future by 10%. Now, let's go ahead and understand the steps for the seasonality index calculation. So there are basically 5 steps. The first step is to calculate average demand for each period in the past demand data, which we call as average demand. So let's do that calculation. I will put this column as average demand. And this is basically calculation of average demand in the past period. So what I will do, I will average and I will take the average of all the last 4 years, which tells me that the average demand in the month of January was 345 quantity. When I drag down this formula below, you will see the demand average for all the particular months. Now I will just sum up the average demand for last 4 years was 4,450 units. Now the next step is to calculate average demand of each period from overall period. Now, this is basically monthly average. So what I will do, I will take this particular total demand to calculate the monthly average. Now, how to calculate the monthly average? We know that we had 4,450 quantity overall demand in the 12 months. So what we will do, we will take this 4,450 quantity. I will lock this particular cell, and this was basically demand for 12 months. So once we divide by 12, my monthly average comes around 371 rupees. When I take this down, this will show 371 is basically the average of the all months, which is an ideal demand when we consider a stable demand pattern. Let's move to the third step. It tells us to calculate the seasonality index for each period. Now we will calculate the seasonality index. Now while calculating the seasonality index, what the formula is, this is nothing but the actual average divided by the monthly average. So here the seasonality index is 0.93 for the first period. When I drag down the same formula below, this will calculate the seasonality index for every month. So for the month of February, it was 1.04. It goes up in the month of March also, it goes up in the month of June, and finally also in the month of December. So this tells us that the demand actually increases in those particular months compared to average demand. Now let's move to the next calculation, the step 4, which talks about calculate next period's average demand that is equal to monthly average forecast. Now what is told to us is that the demand for 2022 will be 5,480 quantity throughout the year. Okay, this is basically our end goal to understand how much demand will be throughout the year. Now we have 5,480 units as our 12 months expected demand. Now what we will do, we will calculate monthly average forecast. So it is simple that if our demand is 5,480 rupees for entire year, the monthly average forecast will be dividing it by 12. So I will just lock this particular cell. So 5,480 is yearly demand, but this is spread across 12 months. So on an average monthly demand in an ideal situation is we will sell 457 quantity. But since this is an ideal situation, we know that there is a seasonality in particular data, like we have seen the seasonality index is going up and also going down in certain months. And that's where we have to also consider this factor in the future forecast. Now, we will go ahead and we will calculate the next step, that is step 5. So it talks about calculate next period's forecast. Okay, so I will put forecast 2022 and my forecast values will be monthly average forecast into seasonality index. So what this tells me is my month on month the forecast will be in this particular range and my final answer is 5,480. Now what is happening here, we will simply understand by taking a trend line. So what we will do, we will select the data, we will see the trend line. Now what happens in this particular trend line is the demand is actually increasing, let's say, in the month of March, that is third month. Again it increases in the month of June and again it increases somewhere in the month of December. Certainly, demand also drops in the period like April, then again in the period like July and August. And this particular seasonality pattern is coming out from the past data. So let's see the past data. Maybe we will see 2021 again. Here, if you see in the previous demand, we had seen that demand was going up in the month of March, also in the month of December, and somewhere in the month of June. But it was getting dropped somewhere in the month of July, August. And this pattern is actually followed in our forecast that is calculated with Seasonality Index. Let's take another pattern in the past, which is 2020. Here you can again see the demand is going up in the month of March, it is falling down in the month of April, also July, and it is again going up in the month of December. So this pattern actually tells us how the forecast will behave in the future. Now, what are the learnings here? The learning here is, if we have a seasonal demand in the past, the ideal situation to forecast is to also consider a seasonality index.
Now, let's look at some of the uses or benefits of the Seasonality Index. The first benefit is Seasonality Index captures recurring seasonal demand patterns accurately, and this helps to improve the forecast accuracy compared to simple averages. So here, if we take simple average, then the future forecast will show 457 quantity every month. But in an ideal situation, however, we know that some months have low demand. Let's say in the month of April, the demand is only 393, but ideal average is 457 units. So we have to also consider when demand goes up, when demand goes down. And in those particular periods, we have to adjust forecasts in a cautious way. The next benefit is it improves forecast accuracy compared to simple averages. Then third is helps to plan inventory and production planning for peak and lean seasons. So once we know there is a seasonality pattern, we can actually understand when we have to plan inventory and production in the peak and lean seasons. Certainly, it also helps to reduce the stockouts, minimize the excess inventory, and finally, it encourages good planning for budgeting and capacity requirement in the organization. So this was all about Seasonality Index. I hope this was easy to understand and follow, and this is very basic method which gives the powerful forecast in the future by considering all the seasonal patterns in the past. And you can definitely try this method on your past demand data, and you can understand what is the Seasonality Index. And according to that seasonality, if you have a number of the future demand, like how much will be the demand in particular forecasted period or in the future, you can definitely come up with the better forecasting approaches in your particular data. So that's all about Seasonality Index. I hope this was easy to understand, and stay tuned for the next important sessions.